Good evening and welcome to our first launch of Spirit. I'm greeting you from the Dennis Arnell Equality Center and Oklahomans for Equality. And tonight we have some wonderful guests with us, Reverend Lebak, and we're going to hear a little more from her. She's going to share with us her personal journey, and Reverend Todd Freeman. And these are two wonderful clergy persons who live here in the Tulsa metro area, but you'll see here each week clergy persons from all across the region, represented by interfaith community, trying to be aware of the diversity of belief in this part of the country. Sometimes people like to silence voices of religious minorities, but we're going to do our best to make sure they're included in Spirit. So welcome to Spirit. We've chose that name, and Spirit, we're doing this during the happy hour, and hopefully you have your little drink. Notice I've got my iced tea because I recycle this plastic cup, but everybody's got their drink. So get you a drink for here in the happy hour, and we're going to talk about, we're going to use spirits, and we're going to talk about spiritual things. So our two guests tonight are spiritual advisors. That's the phrase that we feel like best describes what we want our clergy persons and these chaplains for our community to function as our spiritual advisors. I'll go see a doctor whenever I'm sick. If my mind is troubled, I'll go see a mental health provider. If my heart and my spirit feel at ease, then I'll go seek a spiritual advisor. And so we're just trying to make sure that we're really addressing the needs of the LGBTQ community and their allies here in the Heartland region of the United States. So let me tell you a little bit about the vision behind this. The precepts that govern our spirit conversation each week and that will oversee the programs that we're developing at the Equality Center around faith and sexuality have 4 precepts that we feel like need to govern our conversation. So I want to spell those out for you tonight so that you clearly understand the precepts, and we call these the guardrails, the boundaries that we stay within. So we call it CARE, C-A-R-E. And so the first precept is you must be committed to an interfaith dialogue. So you'll find that each week our wonderful spiritual advisors will be individuals who believe in the value of interfaith dialogue. I'm old enough to remember sitting around the dining room table with my parents and having the discussion about why were the Catholics and the Protestants killing each other in Ireland. I'm old enough to have lived through the period when one religious group decided to massacre the athletes at the Olympics of another religious group. So I'm old enough to have survived and lived through multiple situations where different faith communities have attacked each other, and it's led to violence and it's led to harm. So our spiritual advisors will always have that as a component of their life and their work, that they're committed to interfaith dialogue. Secondly, A stands for affirming the full equality of LGBTQ persons and families within religious institutions. So you'll see that evidenced each week by our guest, and certainly our guest tonight. R of the word CARE stands for resistant to any coercive action of proselytizing and conversion. So our guests who we'll have each week, our guest clergy, our spiritual advisors, they will be resistant to practices that are proselytizing and aggressive conversion techniques. Yeah. I don't like that, and I don't like it played on me, and I don't like to see it when it's played on somebody else. And so there will be no, you're going to burn in hell programs coming out of this particular spirit program. Fourth, committed, we believe E stands for eradicating conversion therapy and in all of its forms, and it's dangerous reparative conversion counseling practices. Right now in Oklahoma, we have a bill at the State House which would legalize conversion therapy in Oklahoma. The rest of the country is trying to ban it, and Oklahoma is swimming with sharks by trying to legalize it here in the state and make it government sanctioned. And so we must all aggressively fight that bill, but that is the motivation that brought us to this period where we felt like it was time for Oklahomans for Equality, out of care for our community, we needed to make sure that we added this dimension. And so tonight, our wonderful clergy persons are going to be joining us. And I think it's time for me to just kind of let them introduce themselves. And Reverend Bonnie Leblanc, could you kind of tell us a little bit about you and about your journey? And I would say I'm going to give you 5 minutes to talk about yourself. So Todd, she'll get to go first. So you'll have plenty of time to think about that.
In church circles, 5 minutes could mean 20. So here I go.
Oh yeah.
Well, my name is Pastor Bonnie Lebak. I pastor a church here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The name of it is House Church Tulsa. But more importantly, I am a cisgendered European American, Native American, bisexual, married to an omnisexual, cisgendered female, Tamara Lebak. And we're actually celebrating our 5-year wedding anniversary this month. So we're kind of in love mode. I am a stepmom. I am an only child. I am 42 and a half years old. And I am happy to be here tonight, serving in the role of spiritual director, advisor, support, and counsel. It is a blessing and an honor to be alongside so many who have been hurt, traumatized, and marginalized by the church. And it is my call and invocation to come alongside and be a counterbalance and a counterweight to the mainstream culture of churches that just can't seem to make the grace circle ever wider. So I'm happy to draw that circle a little wider tonight and glad to be with you guys.
Thank you. That was beautiful. Todd, would you tell us
more? My gosh, you got 3
Yeah, I had 100 questions for it, and we may ask her a little bit later.
I'm Todd Freeman, Reverend Todd Freeman. I am the pastor at College Hill Presbyterian Church here in Tulsa. I've been here almost 14 years now. I have always been a Presbyterian, so I've stayed in the main line since I was a kid. I'm 64. I grew up at thank you, Tamara, Bonnie. I grew up in the Midwest, that in a place that was neither conservative nor progressive. It was just kind of mainline Presbyterian stuff. I never heard anything about all of these things, but I always knew since the very beginning that I was gay. But I grew up in an era in the 70s where a lot of us still bought into the idea that it is something that could change. So, and I ended up with a group of friends in high school that was called the Jesus Freak movement, which got into the really evangelical, biblical literalist kind of stuff, which actually scared my parents since that's not where they were. But believe it or not, that stuck in my head until I went to seminary at 30. So I still started seminary at not openly gay, but gay, and figured that it still was going to change by the time I got, because why would God call a gay person to be a pastor in the Presbyterian church? And that all changed by the time I did graduate. I was pretty much closeted though for a good bit of the time. I've been ordained since 1993, so it's been a long time now. I didn't officially come out until the Presbyterians were fighting marriage equality, whether or not pastors could do such a thing. And I, at a Presbyterian meeting, came out, and the newspaper was there, the Tulsa World, and it was about what we were going to decide. And of course, the Presbytery voted against it, but they also ran the fact that I came out. So that was a very weird way. And then the very next Sunday, and Toby, you were there at College Hill that Sunday after, where I said those words aloud, even though everyone in the church knew. And I wasn't closeted anymore. I hadn't been for years at College Hill. But it was still a big deal, and it was a standing ovation. Presbyterians don't clap, let alone do standing ovations. They were relieved that I finally felt comfortable enough to come out. And now I lead by far the most theologically progressive Presbyterian congregation anywhere, as far as I know. So that's been part of the journey too. Not just progressive socially, which the church always had been, but then theologically, and now trying to, what is progressive spirituality? And that's kind of where I'm at now. Gosh, there's so much more to say about all those things. But College Hill was an openly LGBTQ affirming congregation starting in 2000. And I came in 2008. So there's something very different about being the person leading a congregation into that. As a gay person, would have been harder probably for me if they hadn't already been there, because then they would have seen, I think, me doing it just for my own personal whatever. And it's like, oh no, this is where the church is, and therefore I do fit in, and I knew I fit in when I came there. So there we go.
That takes me through a lot of years in my mind. And I know I've known Bonnie 10 years, Bonnie?
About 10, yep.
Yeah. Met her in some of our local Affirming congregations, or some of our congregations that were, that appealed to, especially to people who came from evangelical, spirit-filled backgrounds. And then Todd, I can remember, help me with the name, Radford
Rader, the previous pastor at College Hill.
Yeah. I can remember when they went through that process, and but then I can remember when we heard that they had called you, and the secret was out, and then probably where I just fell so much in love with Todd and just his whole spirit was I had the opportunity to travel with Todd through Tulsa Metropolitan Ministries, dual narrative, is that what they call it? Dual narrative tour?
Dual dialogue.
Dual dialogue. Now, I had been to Jerusalem and the Holy Land. That was it's either my 5th or 6th time, but I had always went as a millennialist and now millennials still mean something else back in those days. I went there as a religious conservative, and so I had never been where we had a dual narrative. And Todd, I know that Aaliyah may give us extra money for promoting this, but I think that was one of the most meaningful experiences I'd ever had, to tour the Holy Lands and to hear the 3 different narratives. And we were there, and then we went to Turkey, and we got to see Paula Sophia. And I don't think you can see on my wall, right here is a picture that Reverend Todd Freeman took at one of the oldest historical cathedral church, which is a mosque. It's now been turned into a mosque again, but there we were. And that I think that building's 1,300 or 1,400 years old. Todd, you might help me with that.
And just real quick, the dual dialogue meant we had a guide who with a Jewish perspective and a guide with a Palestinian perspective, and then of course Alia with Islam perspective. Yeah. So that's.
But we visited. I mean, we visited Messianic Jewish sites. Remember that hotel we stayed at in Tel Aviv, and where we got in trouble for being too loud, and so it was meaningful. But that's where I just really learned to appreciate Todd, his ability to be able to see the moment we were in and capture it, and then had a whole art show here at the center that was showing his travels around the world.
Well,
so
thanks for that.
I want to see if we would like to have a few of the questions that we've prepared and just kind of see Bonnie's perspective and Todd's perspective. Were you ready for me to get into that, or did either one of you had anything else you wanted to share?
Let's do it.
Okay. So Bonnie, I just want to ask you, Now I think I want to ask Todd this. My apologies. Todd, what does it mean to be a welcoming congregation, and what does being welcomed look like in the church? And so I know the Presbyterians kind of have a whole formal process as a mainline denomination.
Yeah, things are so much better than they were, but being a welcoming congregation removes the stigma of when somebody walks in with a couple, as a couple, for instance, or singly, but they don't have to hide the fact that they're gay, lesbian, or even transgendered, who we've had members in the past, transgender members. So there is a 90, she's now 97. When she was like 94, 95, she did tell me she still found it a little uncomfortable to see two men holding hands or with arms around each other in church. And I said, well, the others can do it. And so there's still some process with folks not being used to that, but it is a safe space. And one of the things I've learned in doing racial justice work is not creating just a safe space, but a brave place, because safe for one group of people isn't necessarily safe for another. So the point is it's almost a non-issue, and that's it's so wonderful that people aren't going or questioning. We have people in leadership, ruling elders, and have been for 20 plus years or more, openly gay, back before we were even supposed to do that. So if any hierarchy in the Presbyterian Church wants to come after us for that, I just blew it. But anyway, it's because the church had always been that kind of welcoming. We recognize people as human beings, and not try to be so categorical with that. So everyone can find a place, and everyone truly is welcome. And I almost don't like the name. I don't like the name a friendly church, because that usually just means the people within the group are friends, but good luck to anyone else who comes in afterwards. So no, it's teaching what true hospitality is a tough part of it, but that's what we try to model, is what genuine hospitality and welcoming is.
And so you're within your denomination, there's a process that a church, a local congregation can go through to be recognized. What do y'all call?
Oh, yeah. All of the mainline denominations have their own program. It's usually open and affirming congregation or reconciling congregation. Presbyterians call it being a more light Presbyterian church. And believe it or not, that came from a pilgrim pastor in England sending off pilgrims, and he did a sermon once that said, God hath yet more light to shed from the scriptures. And it's so funny then that we use that as our understanding of having more light, by recognizing that God loves all of creation without exclusion. And that includes, of course, LGBTQ folks.
And so, Todd, help me just understand this, because whereas you could have a denomination that maybe had taken a strong stand for inclusion, or maybe said that they were going to ordain openly LGBTQ persons, and that they were going to perform same-sex weddings. But even within those denominations, aren't you going to have some more conservative congregations?
Which of course we do.
Yeah.
And they will, and some have said as an official policy for that congregation, I won't name names, that we will not allow openly gay LGBT elders. We won't ordain them to ruling elder, or we will not, no staff person will do same-sex marriage. But because those two things passed, a lot of Presbyterians have left the Presbyterian Church. And there's several different Presbyterian denominations, believe it or not. We're the mainline ones, but the ones that have become real conservative, like Kirk of the Hills Presbyterian, left the denomination over these kind of issues. And so the resistance against being inclusive has deteriorated a lot, and we are actually better in community and relationship with one another now. And we've all decided, people have said, College Hill, that's just who they are. That is their mission, and we'll not attack them for what it is they do. And then I try to tell our folks, then let's not attack those folks for what they do, unless it's spiritual abuse, which still happens, and I speak out against such things. One of the neat things, though, on the floor of Presbyterian when we meet is, because I'm at College Hill, I'm kind of like the person who gets up to speak about such things, because there's a lot of very open, not gay, just inclusive pastors, but their congregations aren't. They run the kind of the gamut, the
Right.
purple. And so they can't say what they would and need to say. And so kind of become the spokesperson for that, but have always been affirmed for being able to say what needs to be said.
And I think that that's one of the points I wanted us to make sure, that's why I had you answer this question, is so that people understand that even within traditions that seem to have extremely progressive policies and seem to be more settled on LGBT issues, that even within those denominations, you're going to encounter, not every church in that denomination is going to be as welcoming and inclusive. And so the contrast is that College Hill took all the steps to say, we are official, this is our position, because we have had this happen a couple of times where we have had individuals who live out in rural parts of the region who call us wanting to find a clergy person to do their wedding, or they're looking for an inclusive congregation. And we've been a little flippant and just said, well, here's the denomination. So if you have a Lutheran church or a Presbyterian church or a Disciples of Christ Christian church, you'll be safe. Well, that's not necessarily safe. And even within welcoming and affirming churches, there's a possibility, just like you described, the individual who said she was still a little uncomfortable with, I mean, I've been in church my whole life, and some of the hatefulest, meanest things I've ever had said to me were said at church. And
we laugh because it's so sadly true. I know.
It's true. So it would not be wrong for us to belabor this point. And that's why I'm using you as a wonderful example that when you're looking for a congregation, do not just assume that just because the name on that door, because that's also, I mean, there are some denominations that are very conservative and will never ordain openly LGBTQ persons and will never allow you to get married. But maybe that local congregation, they are out of step with their denomination, and you'll find them to be incredibly welcoming and loving and inclusive, and almost like renegades within their own denomination. I mean, just because the name's on the door.
Right. Good point. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I get calls quite often saying, I'm moving to so-and-so. Do you know a congregation like College Hill that I can, there? And so it's usually the UCC church, and it's always the Unitarian church. But it's, and then the smaller the town, the harder it is to find an inclusive, truly open congregation. I think. I mean, that's a stereotype, but that's often the case.
Bonnie, can I pick another question, or did you want to weigh in on this discussion? This particular.
No, let's go ahead. Let's jump around.
Okay. Why do you feel like it's important that we acknowledge or talk about LGBTQ identity in the church? Or maybe you don't. I mean, we want to hear your perspective about acknowledging sexuality in our faith communities.
Sure, absolutely, because the body is important. The individual body and the body universal. And because there is this assumption in a particular culture or society of who belongs and who doesn't, it's important to note those that feel or have been historically marginalized. It's important to name those names and name those people groups because they haven't been so mainstreamed and not acknowledged. And I think it's important to name LGBTQ plus in the body, and in my narrative, the body of Christ, because they have been so explicitly and directly excluded. And so as a counterweight, a counterbalance to what happens, we have to name it. We have to name it and say it. This is not a cisgender white God that we serve. Come on, let's go on down the road and let us name the body in which we belong and name our bodies individually that belong. I often say that when I'm preaching, when I used to preach before the pandemic, remember that, when we used to gather in a space, remember all that stuff? And I'd get on a roll and I'd say, you are wanted, you are welcomed, and you are worthy. Because so many have been traumatized and marginalized and don't feel that they belong in the larger body. And there's a legitimacy to talking about things that people don't want to talk about. And as the famous and wise Mr. Rogers said, whatever we can mention, we can manage. And not only that, we can celebrate.
Did you know he was a Presbyterian ordained pastor?
I did know that.
We'll claim that.
Yeah.
I love that.
You did good with that one, Todd. So there's reasons for me to like the Presbyterians. You and Mr. Rogers. Okay. Yeah. Well, Bonnie, that's I love your say that again. You're welcome. You're wanted. You're worthy.
Yes.
Did I say it right?
WWW. You're welcomed, and you're welcome, and you're wanted, and you're worthy. You're not just accepted. You're not just it's not just permissible for you to be here, but you're celebrated. And I think that's a different kind of a deal. You know, when I was first coming into a place of reconciliation with my sexual orientation and my spiritual life, I found that there are places and entities and organizations that will permit you to come, permit you to be, and they will even take your money. Money speaks beyond the LGBTQ boundaries. Places that will not allow you to serve or lead will take your money, but they will not allow you to influence or let your voice be heard. And we are not just we're not the only people or subgroup of society that has this problem. And I don't even pretend to believe that we are. But when you're welcome to the table, that's one thing. When you have a voice at the table, that's another thing. When your voice is heard and your perspective is acted upon, that's real inclusion. Mm. And to give folks a leadership, leadership influence is important to me.
Absolutely.
Just let me ask both of you this. Both of you are open about your identity, your sexuality, your identity. I appreciated Bonnie giving all of her labels, telling us how she labels and her relationship with her same-sex partner and their labels. And so what has it been like to be open clergy, and what perspective, unique perspective that you possibly bring to ministry? Just your curiosity, just curious to know what makes you unique, some things that you bring to ministry that maybe the cisgender straight person may not.
I guess I'll start. I mentioned that still thinking things, the sexual orientation could change even into my 30s. And then by the time, it's super important to say that I finally realized that I wasn't called into ministry in spite of being gay. I was called by God into ministry because I was gay. And then to stay within a denomination,
Wow.
when all the others that I know
Huge.
were leaving, going to the UCC church, going Unitarian, going to chaplaincy work, which is all phenomenal. But Presbyterians lost a lot of qualified, wonderful LGBTQ folks that could be pastors. And so I had to be in about all that. I think that I read in a book by Chris Glosser, one of the greatest gifts that gay folks have to offer is their vulnerability. And that leads to then a true sense of authenticity. And that's something that has been recognized and highly, means the world to the congregation to know that I can be who I am, because I expect them to be who they are. And too many pastors in my mind are just, because we live in a fishbowl, are afraid to share any vulnerability about themselves at all. And I found that's been a real gift. And then therefore, especially for LGBTQ folks, knowing, and not that the pastor has to be gay to be welcoming, but there's something they recognize, oh my gosh, done all these spiritual mental gymnastics with scriptures to know why it's God's totally fine with all of that, as opposed to I'm just trying to make myself feel okay about it. It's like, no, God's okay about it. And so people can ask me anything. And that's a blessing to me and to them.
That's huge, Todd. I mean, that's a big deal,
Yeah.
what you just said, because I love how you said that. God didn't call you in spite of your gayness. He called you because you're gay. And I think this celebration, it's not that God is just fine with God's creation. God is creating diversity and embellishing on that and allowing us to become more and more aware of that diversity and the beauty that is within that. And I love that you said that, and that we can actually emphasize these differences. It would just be such a beautiful thing for all of us, and let the love
and
rise.
celebrate.
Yeah, and celebrate.
And celebrate those things, not tolerate, like you were saying. It's not as just okay. It's like, no, that's so awesome. One of the things that has helped, because I'm just reading this book called Caste, which is, of course, about racial justice issues, but it is so powerful about how we have a hierarchy, and then I'm about as on top as it can be, except for being the gay part. So there's that thing about being, if people knew who I am, there's consequences that go with that, and overcoming that and doing that anyway. But there's just been a sense of compassion that I've noticed in LGBTQ people that I just haven't in a lot of straight folks. And I think it has something to do with learning to care for oneself, and then learning to truly care for the well-being of others, especially those that are struggling with their sexuality in a faith perspective. And so just that compassion just kind of overflows. And that is something people need to know, that people do care for them at that level.
So I'm going to put a little bit of a spin on this question that I think we shared with you. Let me check with KO. KO, do we have any questions that folks have posted that we need to answer those first? Okay. So I want to ask this question, but I'm going to put a spin on it. We sent you the question and we said, what would you say to your younger self if you could go back in time? I want you to answer that, and then we're going to put a spin on it, okay? So Bonnie, tell us what you would tell your younger self.
I know the expected answer is that it might be something that I might tell myself to accept myself earlier. And this may get me kicked out, but everything that I went through as a kid and everything I went through as a teenager and as a young person developed and created the container in which I was able to hold all of the things that I'm currently holding today. If I hadn't had that strong, authoritarian, conservative, evangelical upbringing, I don't know that I would be standing right here. So I'm really grateful for the way in which my tradition was so limiting, because sometimes I think a limiting sphere or a black and white sphere, a very literal way of being, can allow, well, at least for me, I mean, because you're talking about me and myself as a young person, it allowed me to take a risk, burst out, explore and discover. It kind of served as a springboard to actually launch me higher and take me farther than what I could have if somebody had just told me everything is all in. For me, I needed the constriction so that I could have this expansion. And it really propelled me farther. You know, if you guys are Bible people, how Paul said that, you know, his thorn in the flesh actually served to throw him beyond the usual mark, or, you know, that's what the Greek would say in that respect, that all of these troubles and trials and obstacles serve to actually be this launching pad. And so I would say to myself, enjoy where you are, take up all that you can, because soon and very soon you're going to get so academic and so big and expansive that you'll be able to grapple with all that stuff later on. Just love the people that love you. Love your mom and dad. Love them for who they are and how they could do, because they just didn't know. And then allow the grace and the wonderful expansive love and grace of God to take you farther, and to not be so anxious to grow up. When I heard myself say earlier that I was 42 and I'm still counting half years, I'm 42 and a half. See, I mean, don't be so anxious to grow up. Stay right where you are and enjoy the years that you have and the months that you have. Now, I'm not being LGBTQ, I'm just being a human being. So don't wish for tomorrow too soon.
Very good. What about you, Todd?
Oh my gosh. Bonnie, that so beautifully said. And I want to echo, I was going to say basically the same thing. It's like, what would you change? I don't know if I'd change anything except knowing that God always loved me for who I was, and to not give myself such a hard time about that, and not be so obsessed over the sexuality part of it all. But if I hadn't been closeted, and I'm not, you know, it's historical context too. You know, this is again the 70s versus now. I wouldn't tell anybody, being out early on, I think, is the greatest blessing our society has moved to. But if I was, I wouldn't have been in seminary. I wouldn't have stayed Presbyterian. I wouldn't be exactly where I am right now, and having now 27 years of fighting the prejudice against LGBTQ people in a denomination that didn't even quite realize that they were that prejudiced against. I mean, they just didn't address it, and all the horrible things that. So by being able to speak out, it's helped me find my voice as who I am. And I'm actually incredibly introverted and not a social, and so to be able to have the opportunity to preach in a pulpit and share inclusiveness and God's love and acceptance and being wanted, welcomed, and worthy is a gift that's unbelievable. So in a way, I wouldn't change anything except that part of knowing I'm loved. And yeah.
So that's both for both of you. That's an interesting perspective. My thought would be entirely different personally for me. And so what I want to do is just edit this a little bit. And so I said, what would you say to your younger self if you could go back in time? Now, here's what I want to do. You're both pastors. Obviously, you love people, or you wouldn't be in this line of work or doing this kind of ministry. Unless you're under a rock, or you've not followed social media or TV or news recently. A couple of weeks ago, we had a child, an 8-year-old child, who was attending a religious school. And it's not important the details, but she let it be known that she had a crush on a girl. And she's an 8-year-old child. And where that eventually ended up, they wanted the parents to reinforce their admonition to the child that there was something wrong with her for being that way, and that she was not welcome in the school. And they forced that child and her siblings out of that school. And so this week, that family has had to relocate their kids to another school. And Chloe has forever changed our perspective on this particular program we've launched. So not what would you tell your younger self, but what would you tell Chloe tonight? What would you tell her? And
am I going, Todd?
Why not?
You're gonna send me out. You're gonna send me out here on this one. Yeah. Well, I'm intimately acquainted with the situation and that story specifically, and I would tell Chloe that sometimes adults make complicated and sad and mean decisions based on the information that they believe to be true, but they don't always know what's best, and they do not entirely or ever wholly speak for God. That Chloe is absolutely perfectly and wonderfully made, just the way that Chloe is made. And some adults may get it wrong, but this is not to say that God got it wrong. Parents sometimes make bad decisions. Leaders and authorities make bad decisions. But your human worth and dignity and God's love for you and your love and your little crush, I wouldn't say little, I would say that crush that you had on that girl, that was real. And we acknowledge it, and we will walk through with you, and you are completely and fully capable and able of having feelings and expressing those feelings. And I'd probably say a whole lot more, but knowing Chloe and having a 10-and-a-half-year-old myself, just getting out 2 words, I'd probably be told that she had it all figured out already. Because I know how these kids respond. They don't listen very long. So, but if she were to listen to me very long, I would go on and on and on about how good she was. But she would probably tell me, I understand, Pastor Bonnie. I know God loves me. I know those people weren't good. Or of sound judgment. I shouldn't say that. They are good. They're just not of sound judgment.
I thought you were going to ask, what would you say to the school?
Oh, we may get to that.
But no, and boy, and I was going to talk
That'd
about.
be another thing, Todd. If we were to talk about how we're going to talk to the school.
Yeah, I mean, that's mental and spiritual abuse and complete ignorance of even understanding what's going on. I mean, get a child development expert in here and say, where are people at 8 years old? I mean, to even classify it in the realm of homosexuality is beyond me to begin with. People have crushes on people, and that's so wonderful that you care about another person like that. And I was going to say, yeah, talking to her directly would say the thing that some people just don't understand all that they need to know, and they make decisions based on poor information, but the being loved and all of that part. Bonnie, you answered beautifully.
Well, let me just expound on that. What would you say to the people who did this to her? So first of all, let me say this. Here at the Equality Center, we work with at-risk youth, and we work with LGBTQ youth. And we have so many families that call us who have children who are Chloe's age, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, pre-adolescents, even kindergarten age. We have had so many families call us that we had to establish a whole nother program we have our youth programs called Alphabet Soup. Our children's program is called Alphabet Kids, and it's for transgender children and LGBT children who are pretty comfortable with their identity. I mean, they're the ones that told their families this, and their parents wanted to make sure they could find help. Now, I've been doing this work for several years. I had young people call us, and they couldn't tell their family, they couldn't tell their church, they couldn't tell anybody at school, and they'd call us looking for help. Over the years, we saw that change to where we now have schools calling us, looking for support for students, counselors calling us and lots of parents walking in the door saying, I have an LGBTQ child, I have a trans teenager, I want to get them, we love them and we need help, our family needs this, and we want this. But over the last several years, we've saw that expand, where we've had families who've come in with preschool and pre-adolescent children who are pretty certain about their identities and wanting an opportunity for those children. So we created a whole program for them, and there's lots of families and children. We have some families that when the center's open, they drive 3 hours so that their children can play with other children who understand their uniqueness because they're unique. So now back to this. What would you tell the people who did this to this family?
Well, if given a chance to speak to them, I would want to demonstrate the love that I profess and proclaim. And it would not be to dehumanize or demonize them or use any of the scripture that I have come to be good friends with to weaponize against them. But they probably, there's a psychological component and there's a spiritual and theological component. And I'm curious, I would probably come curious to them about how they were taught, if they were willing to be honest and open about their own experience as a human being and not categorizing or compartmentalizing their experience only as a religious institution. If they were willing and open to that kind of conversation, I think coming curious to the table would be probably my approach, without dehumanizing, weaponizing, polarizing, or demonizing. That's really my ethic. That's what I want to always be. but I will not hesitate for 1 second to stand up and stand in my space and stand for justice and stand up and speak. Because I don't believe that this kind of love that we need in this country right now and in this world and in this Tulsa and this Owasso, I don't believe that that love is a pansy love. And forgive me if that offends anybody, but this is not a kind of cow down and be a doormat kind of love. This is a robust and powerful love that speaks truth to power. And I absolutely would stand in that space in love.
Bonnie, you're so pastoral. My first response, I've learned not to act on my first response because it's only my second response that the compassion then would kick in, and then try to meet them where they are in an understanding dialogue kind of way through the asking of questions, as opposed to just going in there. And do you realize, again, what I said, do you realize the amount of emotional and spiritual abuse you have heaped on this family and now upon our community because da, da, da. So like I said, I'll probably get around to that, but that breaks relationship and that doesn't heal. And I think we have an extra burden as those in the faith community to seek that path through love, including speaking truth to power and all that, but reminding ourselves that God wants us to be in relationship with all, and we need to pray for and love our enemies as much as we do those who are in the same, spiritual bubble that we're in and understanding of things. So, yeah, it's hard to be inclusive sometimes. I've said many times from the pulpit, just because we include folks that other churches exclude doesn't make us necessarily all inclusive. We pick and choose who we also think are outsiders. And it's usually the judgmental part of Christianity that it ends up in that thing. I fight way more against conservative Christians than I do interfaith stuff. Interfaith stuff is awesome. It's like, well, you have a right to believe what you believe, but if you're a Christian, you're not following Jesus if you don't do da da da. So yeah, but I've learned to be in the debate side of things, which isn't always healthy, but that's kind of the role I've had to play also in the wider church.
So let me ask this question, and it's on our thing, and then we're watching our time. And KO, do we have any questions? Okay. KO's going to interrupt us, and he's going to read the question.
So this question is from Kelly. Do you think having the evangelical or non-affirming family experience gives you a unique perspective for families of LGBTQ people who struggle?
And I'm guessing that might be for me, but I'm not sure. It might be for both of us, Todd.
Well, I mean, I had an evangelical experience too. I never came out to my family for the same time until I was in my 30s, but it was nothing but complete and thorough acceptance. So I don't ever know. I never went through that experience of a non-affirming family. Gosh, I think everybody has a unique perspective regardless of their background. And you don't have to have an evangelical experience to I'm not even sure how to answer that.
Well, I would say this, and most of us move in pretty diverse religious circles. This is not just a mainline evangelical church issue. This is an issue with almost in all faith communities. Todd and I witnessed it when we were in the holy city, Jerusalem, when we visited the LGBT center there, and they had on the walls, they had it in Arabic and Hebrew, and they had different support groups for people who came there from Orthodox families, from the Coptic, the church, the religious church that's there. I can't remember the name of the individuals who were coming from multiple religious churches. I mean, there's several cathedrals there that represent several different faith communities. And then they also had to have Muslim communities and Palestinians, and it was all there on their walls, all the different groups they had. So they had a very religiously diverse LGBTQ community where they were helping to help people process some of the same trauma that it was, kind of familiar to our perspective. And we definitely are going to have in our Spirit program, we've already scheduled clergy persons from multiple faith communities and multiple religious groups so that we certainly hear from people on both sides of the issue. I do think that maybe what this is, it says, this may possibly give you, because of your own experience, you might be able to provide comfort. And that was the last question I was going to ask. It says, what advice would you give to a family of an LGBTQ person who is struggling to reconcile their faith and their sexuality? So you've got an individual who may be reconciling their sexuality and their faith, and you may also be having to comfort the family or provide. So what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I mean, if the family member is open, there are a lot of good resources, from groups to blogs to articles, essays, podcasts, churches. If the individual is open, is actually, because that statement, your question is actually, is someone struggling to reconcile? So they actually want to learn more and be informed. In the case of my family, they did not want to learn more or be informed. And so the door was shut with me to even have a conversation about what I was learning or discovering. But if your family is open to that, there's so many good resources. And on housechurchtulsa.com, you can go and look at the resources page. On this OKEQ, you can look at the resources page. I mean, the books, the blogs, the essays, the podcasts, the good ministers and the good ministries abound on how to grapple with what the Protestant scriptures say and the Hebrew scriptures say in the English translation of those scriptures, and how we can really get to know them and participate with them and be in a conversation with them. It has been a great comfort to me over the last 12 years of my journey of coming to a reconciliation point to learn as much as I can. But I came to it, with an open mind, and I think that's probably the most important key, is to understand differing perspectives and be able to hold those.
My response is, first of all, I've learned a long time ago not to ever give anybody advice, but I would make some suggestions. And I was going to say, read. Our culture has ingrained in everybody pretty much just one perspective. And believe it or not, this completely welcoming and affirming and God-loving perspective has not been out there that much or for very long. And now there is a wealth of wonderful things that can read, and to either hand them a book or send them to a place to see that here's some scholars or here's some parents, here's some whatever that they can connect with, to realize, oh, believe me, there is another side to this discussion, and there are other perspectives that you need to consider, and always that maybe if it's a parent struggling, you've probably just recently found out about this. Your child has probably been dealing with this their whole life. So I always would then say to the other person, give your parents some time, because they're just now have a lot to have to learn and then process and then and do all of that. So it's but resources and through the personal contact, and I swear, Toby, the Equality Center is one of the best resources in existence.
Thank you.
To have I've sent so many people there for support.
Well, we've always been real fortunate. We've always had strong support from faith communities, at least for 25 years strong. I mean, they're actively involved in our organization and helping us advance programs. And which leads me, I want to give you the description of this program, which Bonnie and Todd have helped us launch. If I had bottles of champagne to give them, they could take and break it on the bow of this new ship that we're setting sail tonight. And so let me just give you the description and the purpose of what Spirit, every Thursday night at 6 p.m., the journey it's going to be taking. So it's a discussion group dedicated to helping LGBTQIA plus individuals reframe their relationship with religion. Whether their goal is to reconnect with faith, recover from spiritual abuse, renounce faith, or just connect with other people, Spirit is the group for individuals to explore faith and sexuality. And so this will meet every week. In addition to this, we're launching our chaplaincy program at the Equality Center, which we've had in formation for quite some time, and was motivated out of our desire to combat the conversion therapy propaganda that we see, and now presently is a bill sitting at our state house that would legalize conversion therapy, as if you can change somebody just through talking them out of it. And so both certainly the individuals on this panel tonight can tell you how harmful that can be, and also how unsuccessful it will be. So we will be launching our chaplaincy program. So where each week you'll have a chaplain who will be on call here at the Equality Center, and you can call in if you want to talk to a spiritual advisor. We'll give you the chaplain for that week. And then every Thursday we'll have this discussion where we'll have a different spiritual advisor who talks to us about these particular issues and these topics. At the same time, we have launched the Equality Faith Alliance, which is much like our Equality Business Alliance and much like our Equality Health Alliance, where you're able to put your zip code into the metadata search, put your zip code, and it'll pop up with populated of where the closest spiritual advisor. And our goal is to saturate the region. And so if you know other clergy persons out in the panhandle of Oklahoma, out in the panhandle of Texas, up into Kansas. Today we had a family call in from Carthage, Missouri, who were in trauma. And we sure could have used a chaplain to help comfort them because they were really dealing with some painful things. So our goal, you'll be able to put your zip code in the Equality Faith Alliance, and you'll find an inclusive, supportive spiritual advisor. Not necessarily a congregation, but a spiritual advisor, because we feel like that way we can ensure that they're talking directly to a person who will be safe and protecting and educated on these issues. So those are things that we're launching with this tonight. Everybody's given a big hand to Bonnie and Todd for helping us. See, we're all taking our bottle of champagne and we're christening this ship, and it's setting sail. And thank you so much for doing that for us. And so tune in each week. This is recorded. It will be on our Oklahomans for Equality YouTube page, where it is very common. Every week over 1,000 people will download it and view it. And so it'll be there for people to look. It'll be on our Facebook Live. It'll be on our Facebook page. We'll keep it up here for a month, and then it'll eventually be archived on our YouTube page. So it will be shareable and available. So some of this incredible spiritual wisdom for these two wonderful spiritual advisors, you'll be able to get the help that you need just listening to how they let you know. I think this is what I take away from our time tonight. There are other people. You may just be listening to the wrong person. There are other people who can tell you, that's not the God I serve. I can tell you about another God who's loving and affirming. All right. Any closing words from Bonnie or Todd?
just thank you for opening this up. This will make a big difference. And that's what we're all about, is making a difference.
We're excited for this new program. We're excited for how many lives it's going to touch and how much love it's going to spread.
Thank you so much. And in our sound booth, everybody can say thank you, KO, for keeping everything on track. And thank you so much. We look forward to you next week. Thank you both, Todd and Bonnie, for helping us out tonight.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Thanks.